a manga about a manga artist who gets sucked into his own manga. There are plenty of stories detailing adventures in our own world and imaginary foreign lands, but I bet you would be hard-pressed to name many stories where characters cross the border between fiction and reality, where characters have to deal with the events they've written and face the characters they wrote those sometimes terrible events happening to. Imagine finding out you're a character in a story and facing the person who wrote that story. Wouldn't you have questions? Maybe you'd even want to sock them in the face for all they've put you through. Maybe you'd fall into a pit of despair and struggle with the fact that your reality, everything you've known, came from some dude's head. In the manga Opus by Satoshi Kon, you get everything I mentioned and more. This single volume series doesn't just break the fourth wall, it smashes it to bits. Opus is epic in scale not because of how many mountains the characters climb or how many continents they cross, but because of the dimensional borders that they cross. It's epic because it pushes the boundaries of what a story can do, and every last panel of it is incredible. Before I get into the details of the story, just a little background info first. Satoshi Kon is the creator of this manga. Likely you've heard that name before if you're into anime films. He was the director of such fantastic works as Paprika, Tokyo Godfathers, Paranoia Agent, and by far his most famous and critically acclaimed film, Perfect Blue. These films are all brilliant in their own rights, and Satoshi Kon was a tremendous director, well deserving of the legacy he has. But he wasn't just a director. He was also obviously a manga artist. Tropic of the Sea and Seraphim Wings are both very good series. On his Wikipedia page, I was able to find out that Satoshi Kon, though uncredited, was also an assistant artist for the all-time classic manga Akira. His immense skill of direction is very visible in the manga he has created, with pages that flow so well it feels as though you're watching a film. With snappy plots that drive the forward at such an incredible pace, it really feels like you're sitting in a theater. Today we're going to be focusing on his single volume manga Opus, one of the greatest pieces of work he has ever done. Immediately we jump into the climax of the story, the fateful confrontation between the main character Satoko and the psychic cult leader The Mask, with a Q. The Mask hurls a pillar at Satoko, certain death when Lin intercepts it. Bam! Chapter end. Next issue, Resonance, the conclusion. The story continues in sketch, then we zoom out and see a man flipping through the rough draft of Resonance's final chapter. It's a really cool transition, and this is where we meet Chikara Nagai, the author of the massively popular manga Resonance, in a meeting with his editor. Nagai has been struggling with how to end his series, but after much deliberation he's come to the conclusion to do so with a bang. An exchange of blows resulting in the death of both his most popular character and hero Lin and the villain of the story. The editor isn't exactly on board, saying that everyone hates to see their favorite characters go. Nagai agrees with this and says that Lin would probably agree too, that he would hate to go out that way. We then cut to Nagai in his studio struggling to finish the final pages and harping over small details drawn by his assistant, namely a grate that stands out a bit too much. But after working away for hours, the final scene is drawn. That's when Nagai sees a hole in his manuscript paper, and at the bottom of that hole is Lin, holding the page that depicts his death. Nagai was right, Lin does hate to go out this way. Hates it so much that he rips a hole through worlds and steals away the very moment of his death. Nagai thinks he's hallucinating from overworking himself, which seems like a much more plausible scenario than what's actually happening when the page he's holding sucks him through it, tumbling down a shaft and out through the very ventilation grate he was complaining about earlier. He lands on the mask, preventing the pillar from being thrown, and comes face to face with the main character of his own story. From there we follow Nagai as he journeys through his own story, interacts with his own characters, scaring them with the details he knows, finds details he drew, and sees the plot he wrote unwind. At first Nagai believes that it's all a dream. It must be a dream, right? I mean, that dead body beside him, that character he drew dying. That can't be real, can it? If it is, then isn't he responsible? As a matter of fact, isn't he responsible for everything bad that's happened to characters in this story? People in this world? Nagai struggles to convince his main character Satoko that her entire life has been a manga and that he wrote it. In the story of Resonance, there are multiple psychic characters, Satoko being one of them, so Nagai tells her to read his mind and find out the truth. She doesn't need to though, because after Nagai puts on a mask, a mind-controlling device from the story's villain, there's this incredibly trippy but gorgeously illustrated dreamlike sequence. Nagai flies through a vast, space-like expanse where seemingly millions of masks make up the stars. Then hundreds upon hundreds of memories shoot out of his head and fall to the ground like pieces of paper, like pages from a manuscript. manuscript. Both Satoko and the mask are forced to face the fact that they are but characters in a story. After this point, Nagai and Satoko go through the events of the story trying to maintain balance, with every deviation from the plot cracking the fabric of the story's existence, chasing Lin to retrieve the final page of the manga and putting an end to the mask. So what exactly makes this manga special? Overall, it's just a great piece of work, but there are a couple aspects that stand out to me the most. Like I mentioned before, you can tell this manga is drawn by a phenomenal director. The page layouts, the way everything flows is nothing short of spectacular. It's quick, it's easy to follow, it absorbs you. And since it's a single volume of manga, you'll be finished before you know it. The art itself is simple and clean. I personally like it a lot. The character designs are charming and relatable. They don't have a million little details on their clothes, they just look like regular people. Nagai is a stereotypical manga artist. Baggy clothes, uncut hair, unshaved face. Hell, for like half the manga, he doesn't even have shoes. You're watching this disheveled guy stumble through a high-tension thriller of his own creation. At one point, he stops to put on a beat-up, mismatched pair of flip-flops. And at another, he stops to barter for cigarettes with some random dudes. And that leads me into my next point, the characters. The characters in this story are just so damn good. Nagai goes through a journey of great revelation. Thrust into a world he drew and forced to exist alongside people that were once thoughts in his mind, he battles with the idea that his work is something more than drawings on paper. He comes to realize that the things he writes have a much greater effect than he once assumed, and that maybe he should be treating them with a bit more respect. On the opposite side of the coin, you have Satoko and Lin, who have to face the fact that they're simply characters in a manga, and they handle this information in their own unique ways. Lin rebels. He breaks through the fourth wall and takes his destiny into his own hands, not willing to be some tragic sacrifice for the sake of a good story, whatever the hell that means. Satoko refuses to believe. How could all the suffering she's been put through have been, again, just for the sake of a good story? I mean, wouldn't you react the same way? But as the story progresses, the truth becomes increasingly clearer, and contrasting Lin, she comes to accept that reality, and does everything in her power to help Nagai set everything to right in order to conclude the story. It's a fascinating exploration of existentialism. Lin and Satoko have very, very different reactions to the truth, yet both are equally believable. Well, as believable as something so odd, so meta can possibly be, and it's strangely relatable. It's natural as humans to wonder, to struggle with what we are and what everything means, but we will never have as conclusive an answer as these characters receive. This look into what the truth could bring was, in a sense, freeing, because it shows that whatever the truth is, sometimes it's better not to know. Maybe we aren't characters in a manga, probably we aren't, but to be faced with knowledge of things far larger than us can be literally world-shattering. Now, as interesting as that is, to me the most interesting character is Nagai, whose entire point is to explore the responsibility anyone who undertakes creative endeavors has to their work. Nagai was ready to kill Lin at the end of the story because it would have been a cool and shocking ending. To some degree, it would have even been fitting, but that wasn't doing justice to Lin. Nagai recognizes as much in the very first chapter. So through this journey of meeting with and seeing the perspective of his characters, he gains a greater appreciation for the things he creates. He gets to talk to them as real people and begins to understand that that's how he should treat them when writing. I think that's what Satoshi Kon was getting at with this entire story, that as writers or artists or whatever, you have a responsibility to do your work justice, to give them a proper conclusion, which is the perfect segue into my next point about this story. The final thing is the ending. Opus was published in the manga magazine Comic Guys beginning in 1995 and ending in 1996, when the magazine abruptly went out of business before Opus had time to properly end. It left the characters literally in mid-air, but Satoshi Kon wasn't ready to fully abandon the story. Going forward, I'll be spoiling the ending, just a heads up. You can skip to this time if you want to experience it for yourself. It shows us Satoshi Kon himself waking up to a phone call explaining the fate of the magazine. In a meeting with the former editorial team, Kon explains that he could have wrapped the story up in just 3 more chapters. That's all it would have taken. We then see him on the phone with someone, talking about a potential volume release with a final chapter. Everything comes crashing together. The manga and the real world. We don't know what's real anymore. It's then that Nagai emerges from the pages on Kon's desk and they begin arguing. Nagai, similarly to Lin, isn't happy with his fate. That idea comes full circle as Nagai is forced to the same realization as his characters. The two discuss a volume release. Kon even hilariously asks Nagai to assist with the art, and that's where we leave it. An extremely meta ending to an extremely meta series. In some ways, it's perfect. It's completely fitting with the ideas presented earlier in this story, and it's also just really immediately interesting. But obviously, we don't get a conclusion to the stories of Satoko and Lin, or even really Nagai. They're all left hanging. At the end of the volume, there's a message from Satoshi Kon saying he someday hoped to return to the story and give his characters a proper conclusion, but unfortunately he passed away in 2010, half a year after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Overall, despite the abrupt ending, Opus is a phenomenal piece of work. It's a thorough exploration of what it means to be an artist, of the responsibilities that come with that title. It's a story that really pushes the boundaries of what can and can't be achieved in storytelling. It treats the fourth wall not as a wall, but as a passage one can freely step through and, if desired, completely demolish. I've never seen this covered in another manga series, but if you have, or if you know any other series that cover similar topics, please let me know in the comment section below. If anything I've said in this video sounds interesting to you, please go read Opus. It's a great story, and no amount of describing it or saying what's great about it is a fitting substitute for reading it yourself. I've read this manga a couple times, and reading it again for the sake of this video was a great deal of fun. I even found new things to appreciate about it. Anyway, that's all for this video. If you enjoyed, feel free to subscribe, like, comment, hit that bell, maybe share this video with a friend, but no pressure. Thank you as always for watching, and until next time.